Gary Lineker, the last post, an Instagram too far. I mean, an unwittingly anti-Semitic posting, but anti-Semitic nonetheless. He kind of had to go, didn't he?
What I thought was so different about this is that he apologised last week, unprecedented, because he's been involved in countless controversies where he's flatly refused to apologise. He clearly knew he'd overdone it, he'd gone too far this time. He reposted somebody else's pro-Palestine message on social media, but there was a rat emoji involved in that emoji.
Which was one of the Nazis' anti-Semitic tropes.
Now, look, he says he didn't realise. Well, do your homework, mate, before you repost stuff. Check why it's there.
It's easy to do if you don't watch a video all the way through and look carefully. He might have been looking at it on his phone, but no, it was a terrible own goal.
Yeah.
No question about it. And I think the reason he didn't apologise in other controversies is I always thought he had reasonable grounds to defend it. Even if you can agree or disagree, but he had grounds. But here, if you disseminate something that is clearly anti-Semitic, then you have made a huge mistake, as he admitted. And look, he was heartbroken by it because he knew it went against everything he says he stands for.
This is the trouble, isn't it, with a kind of machine gun approach to sending tweets and sending Instagram messages. If you're not careful, inevitably, because of the sheer volume of what you're pumping out, in controversial areas, you're going to slip up.
Remember, not so long ago, was it in 2023, he compared Tory policy or Tory rhetoric on migration to Nazi Germany. Completely over the top. That's almost bordered on hysterical. Frankly, he should have gone then.
A few weeks before, a Holocaust survivor had said the same, and I'd actually confronted Suella Braverman, the then Home Secretary, making the same point. Now,
it's a minefield, though, isn't it? When you get into analogies with the Nazis,
I agree.
It's a real minefield.
And the Holocaust.
Well, alarm
killed 6 million innocent people murdered because they were Jewish.
But the Holocaust survivor had made that point to Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, and he, a couple of weeks on, was doing that. But I think you've got to be very careful about it. And there is a difference between what you say and then what you distribute of somebody else, where you can make a mistake. I think his apologies are heartfelt, but the goodbye from the BBC always felt too long. That I'm going, but I'm not going. So
because he was going to be back next year
for the World Cup,
and the FA.
And now it looks like his last game will be on Sunday.
Maybe when he looks back at his career, perhaps if he'd just stuck to football, which he knew well and did well, he'd still be there.
Yeah, but politics and football intermingle. You think of what Keir Starmer was saying last week, Island of Strangers. And you see the diversity of Crystal Palace and Manchester City on the pitch, and everybody's celebrating together.
I don't remember Desmond Lynam getting involved. I don't remember Desmond Lynam, who used to do that job, getting involved in politics.
Or social media wasn't around then.
Is that Des Lynam, the UKIP supporter? Anyway,
news to me.
Yeah, there we are. So they do mix, and I think Gary Lineker is entitled to say what he likes, but there are consequences, particularly if you work for the BBC.
Given that he wasn't a news operative at the BBC, he was a presenter in sport. Did it matter that much that a BBC employee who was not involved in current affairs was tweeting and Instagramming his personal political opinions? Was it actually a sackable or resignable issue?
No, it shouldn't have been. Now, look, I would see people on the left calling for Alan Sugar, who does The Apprentice, who was with Labour, is estranged from Labour. He'd make political points. So no, he's at The Apprentice. Or Andrew Neil, incredibly esteemed broadcaster, but he was chairing the Spectator magazine, which is clearly on the right. And people would say, well, you have to go because you're doing that. I thought, no. I thought in his day job at the Beeb, when he was interviewing people, he was just wonderfully impartial and gave everybody a hard time. So now I think it matters less if you're doing present Match of the Day. If you were the political editor of the BBC and then you were coming down personally hard on one side all the time, then I would have thought that would be a problem.
He just kept pushing it, and saying, when I heard that apology last week, I thought, the clock's ticking. He's out.
Aren't you an advocate of free speech? Just and against cancel culture. I just asked.
Finally, he's apologised for something, and I think it must be so bad for him to have apologised because he's arrogantly and blithely dismissed all calls to... Hang on, Kevin, if I could finish talking free speech. Blithely dismissed calls to apologise for. When he did apologise, I thought, I think he realises the tectonic plates have shifted.
No.
He's on his way out.
I think he realised he had made a terrible mistake.
Yeah, and he says that
and
he made a terrible mistake, and as you say, apologised. Can we just separately have a look at how likely any ceasefire is going to be between Israel and Hamas? The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu signalled yesterday Israel was open to a deal which would include ending the fighting in Gaza. What has to happen for this to come to an end?
Well, all the hostages have to be given back, all of them. There's still dozens of them. Some of them are dead, so their families want the bodies back, but the hostages have to be given back, otherwise Netanyahu's not going to do a deal.
That's not going to end it, though, because it now seems, and you look at it, supporters of Israel are turning against what Israel is doing because of the brutality of it, the number of women and children, clearly innocent, who've died. You get the hostages back. There is no sign that they will halt now because Netanyahu and the most right-wing reactionary government in the history of Israel will say, we haven't got everybody in Hamas, which is true because Hamas is still functioning. And they're just accepting Palestinians are going to die. And there is the accusation of genocide, and it clearly looks like ethnic cleansing to drive Palestinians out of Gaza.
Well, the debate falls into two separate camps, doesn't it? There's the military action, which is ongoing, the lack of a ceasefire, and there's the blocking of aid.
It's being used as a weapon, which is illegal. And
we hear this morning that Israel has agreed to a partial unblocking of that sanction, so some aid is going to get through. A lot of people are more concerned by that, actually, than they are by the military attacks. They can see a sort of rationale for the attacks, but what they can't understand is why food and water is being denied the civilian population.
It's been used as a weapon by Israel. That's why, which is outrageous, because that's humanitarian aid and it should be getting through to help those children in particular. And you see the last hospital has been evacuated too, working hospital in Gaza, so it is catastrophic.
I noticed in the Sunday papers yesterday, there were a number of articles from people who traditionally have been big supporters of Israel, Matthew Syed, for example, in the Sunday Times, who were saying sometimes you have to speak to your friends the truth, and you have to tell them what's really going on. And there is a definite sense of a backlash, isn't there, amongst supporters of Israel, that things have simply dragged on too far and too long.
Well, I support the existence of Israel, the right of people to live peacefully and prosperously and not be threatened. Absolutely. The pogrom by Hamas was absolutely horrific and an evil crime. But then equally, what Israel is doing in Gaza is equally horrific, except the numbers of people killed is far higher, and there's no halt to it, and it should not be happening. I mean,
What's the Mail's position
horrific.
on it?
Well, the Mail, outraged as everybody by the terrible Hamas massacre of those Israelis, but I think perhaps some proportionality now, but Netanyahu, I think. I talked about the hostages. I think now he's determined to kill every single member of Hamas, but as fast as he's killing them, it's acting as a recruiting agent for more Hamas terrorists, I'm afraid.
Let's turn to an issue that you are probably very exercised about, Andrew, and that is the Prime Minister is going to announce a deal with the European Union. Now, it's coming up to, I think next year will be 10 years since the Brexit referendum. And a lot of people who voted for Brexit might think, hang on a moment, this feels like you are getting back into bed with the European Union. Yeah. How popular do you think a deal with the EU would be? Well,
bearing in mind we've just done a deal with America and India, because we are not in the European Union, and even government ministers have accepted that was a Brexit dividend, Brexit benefit. It seems extraordinary now we're going to jump back into bed with the European Union and accept some of the strictures that were part of why we voted to leave.
So that is the issue, isn't it? If we have to follow EU rules, because we've got closer...
And the European Court of Justice will be back in our lives again.
Does that mean that the deals that we are able to strike as an independent trading nation get compromised?
It would be far more difficult. It will be far more difficult. And what I also find astonishing, as recently as September, the Prime Minister said there will be no deal on 18 to 30-year-olds from the European Union coming here to live here for, we don't know for how long.
Yeah, the Youth Mobility Scheme.
Youth Mobility Scheme. That was as recent as September.
Yeah.
they're confirming it today. Now, the minister who was talking about it yesterday, Nick Thomas-Symonds, was asked on the Koonsberg show how many will be coming here. Is there a cap? No answer. How long will it last for? No answer. That's because the European Union haven't told the government yet how many years.
Yeah, it's just they're still negotiating.
It's how many are coming.
Sounds a lot like freedom of movement of students,
exactly
doesn't it, Kevin?
But they're not students.
No.
I mean, 29-year-olds, 28-year-olds. If it was 18 to 22-year-olds, you might think, yeah, this is about students. This is about lots of very young men and women are going to come from parts of Eastern Europe and take the jobs here, the low-paid jobs that we can't get our own people to do. It's free movement back again.
Do you want to end the schemes, the reciprocal schemes we have with Australia, New Zealand? I think there's one with Japan. That's what we're doing here. We came out of a lot of agreements. Now, you're an old general fighting the last war. I voted to stay in. I would like us back in. This is not us going back in. This is not about remain and leave. This is about how you deal and relate to your closest neighbours and your biggest trading partner. About 20% of our trade is with the US, 50% is with Europe. Now, if the deal comes through, you can use your passport to go swiftly through an e-gate when you go on holiday in Spain.
Yep, I agree, that'd be a benefit.
Great, there's a great benefit.
Sorry, can I just ask on that? Why does that have to be something that's negotiated?
Because we chucked our toys out of the pram and left.
So it was a punishment beating from the
No.
EU
Yes,
to us because we voted for Brexit.
As Kevin said, the vote of 17.4 million was people throwing their toys out of the pram. There is somebody saying it's not about Remain and Brexit. Yes, it is. He's still fighting the old battle.
We pulled out.
Why he's saying we threw our toys out the pram. No, we voted to leave the European Union because we were sick.
And then they made it harder for us to be tourists in their countries.
We got treated like other countries around the world. We had favourable terms. The best deal was when we were in the European Union. We pulled out, so you've now got to try.
We threw our toys out the pram, didn't we?
Well, you did.
Right.
You did
17.5 million people threw their toys out the pram.
Andrew, isn't the big factor that's changed since Brexit is that we now have an isolationist president in the White House, and therefore the general consensus is that here, this side of the Atlantic, Europeans have to huddle together a little bit more closely. We may, in fact, have to pick up the tab for Ukraine if America withdraws. So we do actually have. We are being forced by circumstances out of our control.
It wouldn't matter
to Europe.
Who was in the White House. This Remainer Prime Minister was always going to take us back in as far as he could. Remember, he was the architect of the second referendum plan under Labour. He argued for it all the way right until the 2019 election. He is determined to embrace the European Union. We're going to have the European Court of Justice sticking its nose in our affairs all over again.
God,
the fishermen back in our fishing waters all over again.
But the thing is, you might think economically it's beneficial for us to have closer
socially
ties
and culturally and
with
politically
the EU.
and militarily, yes.
But the trouble is, with that argument, is that a majority voted to leave the EU and still don't feel like we're getting the benefits of Brexit. And, of course, might then think, well, you know, in the next general election, why don't we vote for the person who actually campaigned most successfully for Brexit, Nigel Farage, because he might be the actual Brexit Prime Minister.
Well, let them if that's what they think, but most of those benefits were exposed as myths and lies, and they weren't there. And you're right about Trump emphasising why we need to be closer to our neighbours, but the public mood changed some time ago, and people regret Brexit. Well, you look at opinion, and it is pretty consistent. People regret leaving, and they would prefer us to be back in, although most people don't want to go through the battle again. Just wait a moment.
Right.
And that is why Starmer has very little to fear politically and much to gain from being closer and building bridges with neighbours rather than breaking them.
What an extraordinary statement. Starmer's got little to fear politically. Did he not notice the result in the Runcorn by-election where Reform won Labour's 49th safest seat and where Reform were stormed to victory in the local council elections, and particularly in Redwall seats, Durham? Oh, yeah, this is these are people voting in millions for the man who delivered Brexit. Oh, yeah, Brexit is still very popular in those parts of the country, which is why on the front of the Daily Telegraph today they're
quoted as saying that he can see that there's only one direction that this government's going in, and he'll be the one to stop it at the next election. So he's making real hay out of it.
But Runcorn and Helsby, the by-election lost by 6 votes, wasn't anything to do with Brexit.
Well, if everybody hates Brexit, why is Farage doing so well?
It was the winter fuel allowance and Pip personal independence
Okay.
payment benefit cuts.
I'm glad you mentioned.
That's why Labour
I'm glad
lost
you
it.
mentioned winter fuel, because according to reports this morning, the Prime Minister is poised to reverse certain parts of the winter fuel withdrawal, and it may include, as we have been talking about every day since the winter fuel allowance was withdrawn from most pensioners, the Labour government might raise the threshold, which is currently at £11,500, which is the threshold for pension credit. We know already 700,000 pensioners who are eligible for pension credit and could get the winter fuel payment don't claim it. So, I mean, it's not going to touch the size for them. But, Kevin, are you hearing that this threshold might be raised because of the backlash and because of the by-elections and because of the local elections?
And you raise the threshold to give it back to some people, not everybody, because it was 1.4 billion, took away up to £3 a year from 10 million people. The threshold, as you say now, £11,500, is £230 a week or thereabouts, and that is the rate of a full new state pension. So if you have a small occupational pension, Runcorn and Helsby, lots of former ICI workers worked all their lives, had small occupational pensions, and they lost it, and that's why Labour took a beating there. So they are looking at raising it because they realise now and that it is so unpopular, and it was a catastrophic error.
Would you categorise it as a U-turn?
Oh, yes, of course. But it's how much of a U-turn is it? Because where would you raise it to? Because if you bring in means testing, you always get somebody, it's a cliff edge benefit, there'll be £1 a year over and they'll lose 300 quid. So you could just be creating another rod to
It
beat
also,
yourself
if
with.
you means test it, Andrew, I imagine that also makes it more expensive to administer.
Yeah.
And you get more people claiming, and then the benefit of withdrawing it starts to diminish. And then is it worth the
They're getting to
government
the point.
even
Exactly,
making
Susanna.
a tweak to it? Because it was such a small... In the scheme of the work and pensions budget,
And
the
when you
winter
consider
fuel
the-
payment
exactly.
was such a tiny part of it.
And one of the reasons for not having a full-scale means test is because of the cost. You realise they might just have to get to the point where he says to the Chancellor, "You've got it spectacularly wrong, we're withdrawing it." And you know what? People would praise the government for listening and admitting they got it wrong.
The cleanest, clearest way is just to restore it.
Yeah.
Now, at the time, the Chancellor, when it came out of a clear blue sky, said there was a 22 billion Tory black hole, spending hole to fill.
That's right.
I can save 1.4 billion here. The economy grew 0.7% in the last quarter, and I noticed the language had changed. She said, the economy has turned a corner. That's what she said. All of a sudden, money is
Available.
coming in. Well, it sounded like she's making that case. There is a big spending review due next month. That'll be issued.
Well, we hopefully...
There's your golden opportunity.
We'll have some kind of news on all of this tomorrow morning, but we'll wait and see. Can we just pop back over the Atlantic quickly to Joe Biden? It's interesting, isn't it, that even those people polled in America before he stood down last year, even those who didn't think that he was showing signs of cognitive decline were very concerned about his age, full stop, and that if he'd actually fought and won the election, he would have been in the White House at 86 years old. He's been diagnosed overnight, the news has been released overnight, with a very aggressive form of prostate cancer. This sort of underlines that concern, doesn't it, about having a president that old? Because obviously prostate cancer is very much an age-related disease.
And there's a book coming out this week by which details just how big a problem his decline in his cognitive capacities were when he was in the White House, and how effectively the First Lady was running the White House. But it also suggested they feared if he'd done a second term, he could have been in a wheelchair within 12 months because his health was declining so rapidly. So we have to wish him well, because the fact that cancer's got into his bones...
Yes, it's
not good.
Not good at all. Not good at all. But he always 82, but he always looked so much older. He seemed so much more frail. I noticed at the Pope's funeral a week or two ago, holding on to people the whole time.
He's had, if you look at his life, his wife and child died in a car crash.
Yeah.
His eldest son, Bo, died of...
brain cancer.
Of cancer.
Yeah.
So he's had a lot of blows in his life, but it is in this time, and you wish him well. But, you know, it's going to be likely to be life-shortening, and you do begin to wonder if he'd been elected, might he die in the White House? No point.
And then we would have had President Kamala Harris.
Yeah.
Yeah, but let's be honest, that would be still
we hadn't had-
preferable
of course we-
President Donald
Of
Trump.
course, we haven't had a president die in the White House since JFK, who was assassinated. 8 presidents,
thought.
apparently.
What about Roosevelt?
Yeah, but he was first. I mean, the most
he was
recent.
before.
Most recent.
Yeah.
Most recent.
The King and Queen are going to be visiting the Chelsea Flower Show today. I know how much you love royal news,
Do you
Kevin.
think they've bought their tickets?
Well, I think probably the Royal Horticultural Society
Kevin.
could probably
There's the
extend
Kevin,
a couple of
Honestly,
tickets
Kevin, will you ever give it up?
to the King and Queen.
It does give the flower show a rather lot of good publicity, the presence of the King and Queen.
And there's a new image released by Buckingham Palace that Kevin asked us to show this morning, showing Queen Camilla holding her new pet.
What's it called?
It's a Jack Russell called Madeley.
Madeley.
And it is a rescue dog. And actually, what a fantastic advert for rescue.
Yeah, I agree.
My cat, Suki, is from Battersea Dogs and Cats Home. And, I think everybody would recommend...
My cats are rescue cats.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, Rosemary.
Yes.
Yeah,
From the Mayhew in North
Rescue,
London.
rehome, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, look, that's a very nice picture of an elderly lady with a new dog. I'm quite happy to see that. Yeah.
Coming
I
from
don't
you,
think,
that's
actually, we should be
praising-
calling people elderly at 75.
No, quite right, Kevin.
He's getting worried.
You're
He's getting worried, that's what it is.
You're
Yeah.
accelerated.
It's not.